What's going on, everybody? It's RoarYG here, coming at you with another episode of Sleeper Sunday. Sleeper Sunday, for those of you that don't know, is a series that I came up with showcasing fun hidden decks that you may not know about that can deal quite a bit of damage in the proper hands. We'll be going over a basic deck list, strengths, weaknesses, what could be done to make the deck better, and of course, a few replays to see the deck in action. And in today's episode, we're going over the winner of this month's poll, Mutant. So Mutant is a mid-range archetype that uses low-level monsters to banish resources in order to summon their higher-level monsters with powerful effects based on the type of card banished in order to summon them. It was a TCG exclusive archetype released in Phantom Rage back in November of 2020, quite recently actually, and their most recent support was out of Battle of Chaos just 2 months ago. It has a fusion-focused extra deck with their trap card that allows them to fusion summon, being able to recycle their banished resources as material for them. Despite the fact of how recent the deck actually is, Mutant seems to be a very fan favorite and popular deck, probably due to the aesthetics and also just the overall playstyle. Being able to bring out big beefy bodies is always really fun, and the deck is really good at playing some really good staple cards that can really just blow over a lot of meta decks, making this deck sort of a meta killer in terms of, its viability compared to some of the last decks that we showcased, which were basically more just casual or fun little rogue picks. With that out of the way though, let's go ahead and get right into the overview. So starting off, we're going to go over the two low-level monsters that came out with the very first wave of support back in Phantom Rage, being Mutant MO5 and Mutant ST46. Now both of them on normal or special summon get to search either a monster, being MO5's effect, and a spell or trap if you are summoning ST46. And both of them allow you to tribute themselves and banish a card from your hand or face-up field to special a monster from your hand or deck based on the banished card. Both of them say a monster summons Mutant Beast, banishing a spell summons Mutant Mist, and a trap summons Mutant Arsenal, and you can only use each effect once per turn. My apologies if I'm making a lot of rattling noise with my microphone. I'm trying to get it into a comfortable position because I keep hitting the wire. But the summoning is very specific and admittedly does make you banish resources, and in the grand scheme of things feels a lot like Witchcrafter in the fact that you're getting rid of something and the body on field to actually summon, so it doesn't feel very good to actually do that. But the payoff seems to be quite nice because Beast, Arsenal, and Mist are really, really good. Before we get into their newest support card, I will go over them real quick. So all of the level 8s, it goes levels 1, 2, 3, and then all the 8s in the main, can only be summoned off of mutant cards and cannot be targeted by the type of card that was banished in order to summon them. So Beast can't be targeted by monsters, Arsenal can't be targeted by traps, and Mist can't be targeted by spells. They also all trigger on one of the opposites of the thing that was banished to summon them. And finally, the last thing against the thing that was banished to summon them gets added back to their hand if they're destroyed by an opponent's card. So Beast allows you to, when your opponent activates a spell card or effect, quick effect, banish a card from your hand or field to negate and banish, not destroy, I'm sorry. Arsenal allows you to, when an opponent activates a monster effect, quick effect, you can banish a card from your hand or field to target a monster in the field and banish it. And then Mist allows it to where your opponent activates a trap card or effect, you get to banish a card from your hand or field to draw 2 cards. If Beast is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add a Banished Mutant Trap, Arsenal adds a Banished Mutant spell, and Mist, of course, adds a Banished Mutant monster. All of these are some pretty decent effects, Mist obviously being the worst, hence why we played 2 of the others and only 1 of him. But Arsenal being able to have some spot banishing as a quick effect is really nice, and then Beast is obviously a negate, and negates are very favorite in Yu-Gi-Oh!, so that is usually the one you want to summon the most, especially because you're going to have a lot of monsters in your deck that you can banish to summon him. Admittedly, they all also have to banish something for cost in order to use the effect, so you're going to be negging quite a lot of resources, so you got to make sure that you balance out your resources and exactly when you should use the effects in order to maximize your efficiency. For the longest time, we really only had MO5 and ST46 in order to summon these big guys, but with Battle of Chaos being introduced in February of 2022 for the TCG, we were introduced to Myutant Mutant. Yeah, I know the name is incredibly stupid. It was called Mutant Mutator, which also sounded almost equally as stupid, but regardless, this is a level 1 that says if you control a mutant card, you can special it from your hand, and you contribute it to and banish a mutant card from your hand or deck to summon in the same way that ST46 and ML5 do from your deck or hand, but you lose life points equal to the monster that you summoned. Because you get to banish a card from your hand or deck, it obviously must have a little bit of a downside so that it's not too powerful, otherwise you'd be able to shit out these things like super easy, though you do also have the restriction that you can only banish a mutant card rather than being able to banish any sort of card from MO5 or ST46, and you can't banish from field. I forgot to mention that all of the low levels are water psychics, and both of the fusion monsters in the extra deck are psychics, with Ultimus being the only one that isn't a water, being a dark instead. And all of the level 8s have different types and attributes, Mist being a wind spellcaster, I know it's weird, Arsenal being a fire machine, and Beast being an earth beast. These are all some really solid effects, unfortunately slapped onto some resource negging in terms of what you exactly have to get rid of, which is why Myutant Mutant was such a great addition to the deck, so that you didn't have to constantly be negging cards from your hand or field, and you can at least utilize some resources in your deck so that you're not just completely running out of things in your hand or field. As you may notice, the deck likes to banish a lot, and so of course they're not going to really care if their stuff is banished, and so you get to play power cards such as Dimension Shifter in the deck, which is kind of one of the main reasons why this deck can see success, because let's face it, if your deck can play Dimension Shifter, you're in a really good spot. We also have a Dasher and a Celestial because we do play DPE, not because the deck really needs to get carried by it, in fact we barely make it unless we hard draw the Fusion Destiny, but because it's just a nice addition to have on top of an already established board, and the advantage that Dasher and Celestial can give is insane. That's what we play for the monsters though. Let's go ahead and get into some of their back row, because their back row is pretty cool. First off, we have their field spell Mutant Evolution Lab that says on activation, you can special one of your level 4 or lower mutants from your hand or that is banished. So usually, say you can summon an MO5 or an ST46, search off of them, use their effect banishing each other from hand or field or something like that, probably from hand. And then you can activate Evolution Lab to special the thing that you banished back, and then trigger its effect as well, and you have a thing on field to banish, and a thing that can trigger the banish, period. So it's really good in situations like that if you want to net yourself some more advantage and another body on board. It also says that your mutant monsters gain 100 attack for each of your banished mutant cards with different names, which admittedly doesn't come up too much because you will be recycling a lot of your banished cards using their things like their Fusion Trap, but it is a little nice boost that can help you get over some problematic things here and there. It also says once per turn during your main phase, you can place a mutant monster from your hand on the bottom of the deck, and if you do, draw a card, and you can only activate one of these per turn. Admittedly, you're mainly using it for the fact that it's a spell that you can search in order to get a free body off of ST46, but also it does, like I said, get you the extra advantage in terms of specialing from your hand or your banished to get that free search and to get that free summon. The attack boost is kind of nice, and the draw power, while really good at recycling clunky hands, which this deck really seems to like, it's not going to come up too often because you do run things like Pot of Prosperity that says you can't draw cards, but it is always nice to have just in case you don't draw something like Prosperity. There's also Mutant Fusion, which is highly frowned upon by most Mutant players, but I like to play just the single copy, which says Fusion summon a Mutant Fusion from your extra deck by banishing materials from your hand or field, but if your opponent has activated a card or effect this turn, you can use up to one monster each from your deck and graveyard as Fusion material, and you can only activate one per turn. So because it actually banishes from deck and graveyard as well if you get the card or effect clause on it, I think it's really good as a card in order to get out something like your Ultimus, which is really hard to summon since it requires 3 level 8 or higher, and so I do like just playing the one of as sort of a last resort sort of thing, especially because if you are getting hand trapped, you can still at least go into one of your fusion monsters, but it's really, really good in the later parts of the game, turns 2, 3, 4, whatever, because your opponent's probably going to have some sort of disruption even if it's not a negate, and so fusion can allow you to get just a free fusion out while also banishing things that you can use for later with things like your fusion trap. We also have an honorary mutant card in the form of 3 emergency teleport. Because it did come to 3, this card really helps the deck out a lot because again, all the low levels are psychics, and because E-Tele says 3 or lower, you can summon just about any of them and get the free searches on top of that, which is really good during the draw phase in order to avoid things like droll, and of course it's a quick play as well. And banishing it during the end phase if you don't use its effect for some reason doesn't really matter because again, the deck doesn't really mind banishing its things that much. We also have 3 Pot of Prosperity because the extra deck has a lot of flex spots, honestly. You can really just get rid of, if you want to go for 3, which you really don't need more than that half the time, you can just banish one of each fusion and then one of any of these cards because they're just such great flex cards. I almost never go into any of them. And then we do play the 2 Fusion Destiny for the Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer. Under their trap cards, we have 3 Mutant Cry, which is their fusion trap, that says during the main phase, fusion summon a mutant fusion from your extra deck by shuffling the materials listed on into the deck from among your cards in the field, in your graveyard, and or among your face-up banished cards, and you can only activate 1 Mutant Cry per turn. So given how much banishing this deck likes to do of its resources, especially their monsters, in order to summon something like Beast, you're going to be having a lot of materials for Cry, which also not only allows you to get a really good fusion monster out, but allows you to recycle your resources for later, because you're probably going to want to use them later in case you want to use your big guys and summon them out again after having already summoned out both or banished one or something like that, because your little guys can always just have resources to banish in order to summon, you know, a bigger guy. Being able to use your field grave and your banish stuff is really, really powerful, and a lot of decks would kill for something like this. This is like Dinomorphia domain levels of good right here. using 3 different zones, as well as just recycling your resources, period. The only thing that could make this card better is if it said draw a card afterward or something. And when you look at the fusions, especially Mutant Synthesis, you will understand why it's so great that it's a trap card, or even if it was a quick play spell, it'd be really good. So we'll get into that in a little bit. We also play 3 Mutant Expansion, which isn't as good, but it's still a pretty great card. It is a continuous trap that says when you activate it, you can take a level 4 or lower mutant from your deck and either add it to your hand or special summon it, which is really great for triggering the search effect on your opponent's turn, or just getting a free body out, period. Especially because that body can be used as banish fodder for something like Beast or Arsenal. And you'll notice it's a continuous because it says if a level 8 or higher mutant monster you control be destroyed by card effect, you can banish it on your field instead. And you can only activate 1 mutant expansion per turn. So while the protection doesn't really come out too much because you don't mind if they die, honestly, if they would be destroyed by card effect, you're just gonna float anyway. It is really nice to stay on field because that is an extra thing you can banish off of MO5 or SD46 in order to summon an Arsenal, and Arsenal being 3k is really, really good. So while expansion isn't the best of their cards, especially in terms of their back row, it still is really, really solid. And then of course, as I pointed out, while we do have a lot of psychics in the deck, we do play beasts, machines, and spellcasters, and so we can play There Can Be Only One, which is one of the many great shutdown cards that the deck can play in order to be an anti-meta deck. For the rest of the Mutant main deck cards, specifically the ones that we don't play, we have Mutant GB88, which came out, I believe, I think it was the next set. I don't actually think it came out with the originals. I think it was one set afterward. But it says during your opponent's main phase, if Mutant Evolution Lab is in your field zone quick effect, you can special it from your hand, and if it's special summoned during your opponent's turn, you can tribute it and then banish a card from your hand or face up field to special a level 8 mutant monster that is banished or in your graveyard, and you can only use each effect once per turn. So some of the main problems with GB88 is that it can only special itself during the opponent's main phase and only trigger the effect if it's summoned on the opponent's turn, meaning that you can really only trigger it off of its own effect and expansion. Because it's not level 3 or lower, you can't summon it off of E-Telly. It requires Mutant Evolution Lab specifically in order to special itself, which I think is a bit too specific. It could have just said if you control a mutant card. I think that would have been perfectly fine. And then, of course, not only do you have to tribute it in order to special, you have to banish just like all the other ones, meaning you're going to be losing a lot of resources, and you can only special a banished or graveyard level 8 mutant. If it could summon from deck as well, I would understand playing at least 1, which I think when it came out, mutant players only played like 1 anyway. But with Mutant out, there's really no need to play GB88, and so it just stays in the stockpile. We have Mutant Blast, which is an equip spell, oddly enough, that says you can only equip it to a level 8 or higher mutant monster. At the start of the damage step, if it attacks an opponent's special summon monster, you can banish that opponent's monster, which is a pretty good effect, admittedly. And while it's equipped to a monster, you can banish it to send the monster that it was equipped to the grave, and if you do, special a level 8 mutant with a different original attribute from your hand or deck. And you can only use each effect once per turn. Admittedly, it's not the worst effect, especially being able to tag out. However, unless it was a quick effect, there'd be no real reason to tag out, especially because, like, you can't do it during the battle phase or something for additional damage. Plus, the effect to banish is really, really good, but it is a battle-focused effect, and you're probably just going to be removing the monsters from the field via different means such as Arsenal, or you'd rather just punch for some damage, because you are equipping it to a level 8 or higher after all, and their stats are pretty good. It's definitely not the worst card, it is better than GB88, however, you really just don't need to see it. We now have Mutant Clash, which is their other trap card that we don't play, that says when you activate it, you can target an effect monster your opponent controls, banish a mutant monster from your graveyard, and if you do, negate its effects until the end of the turn, even if it leaves the field. And when you're level 8 or higher, a mutant monster destroys an opponent's monster by battle, you can draw a card, and you can only use each effect once per turn, and you can only activate 1 per turn. Mutant Clash is honestly just a bit too slow in order for its effect to be really good. Negating a monster's effects isn't terrible, but it is only until the end of the turn, and not while it's face up on the field, so it's a bit too specific when you could just play something like Imperm. And then, of course, another battle-focused effect is a bit underwhelming. It's honestly even worse than Blast, because, ooh, you get to draw a card, but it's like, weren't these kind of cards printed back in like 2008? So yeah, it's just an overall really slow card when you could just play something like Expansion if you want a continuous trap card, since at least Expansion has some protection embedded into it, as well as being able to swarm the board. But that's it for the main deck cards. Let's go ahead and get onto their extra deck. We're gonna actually start with Synthesis first, which is their level 9 fusion, and it requires 2 mutant monsters with different attributes. Of course, it's a water psychic, and it has 2500 attack and 2000 defense, so overall very, very good stats. And if it's fusion summon, you can target a card in the field and destroy it. Obviously, very generic, you can target any sort of card in the field. Even though it does target, it is still some great removal, especially because you can summon it off of Mutant Cry. It says when your opponent activates a card or effect, quick effect, you can activate this effect. For the rest of this turn, this face-up card is unaffected by the effects of an opponent's cards of the same type, monster, spell, or trap, as that card. Really, really solid protection there, especially if your opponent's running a highly monster-focused deck, which, a lot of decks are, and even better against something like a trap deck, because Trap decks have mostly traps, and that's kind of what they're relying on for their removal, and so unless they're playing like Eldritch and they punch over Mutant Synthesis, you're really gonna have a hard time outing this if you're playing a trap deck. But even if they do punch over it with something like Golden Lord, it says if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add one of your banished mutant cards to your hand. You can only use each effective Mutant Synthesis once per turn. Very great recursion there, honestly, being able to grab any banished mutant card instead of a specific one like Arsenal, Beast, and Mist allow, because honestly, Synthesis probably isn't going to stay on the board very long. However, you're going to kind of towers protect it with its own effect in order to try and keep it as long as possible, while also just using it as a punching bag, really considering that you can get it decently big off of Evolution Lab if you didn't get rid of a lot of resources for Cry. We also have Mutant Ultimus, which is their big boss monster, their like big papa or whatever. It is a Dark Psychic, it is a level 10, with 3,500 attack and 3,000 defense. It is very large, especially with an Evolution Lab on board, and guaranteed, because he is so good and so big, he's going to require a very steep cost, so of course he requires 3 level 8 or higher mutant monsters. So you're going to have probably at least one of each of these, or maybe 2 Beast or 2 Arsenal, because Mist you don't really summon too often, and you're going to have them banished and you're just going to put them back with Cry, really. That's like the most accurate explanation of how you're summoning this reliably. But it says when a card or effect is activated, quick effect, you can banish a mutant card from your hand, graveyard, or face-up field of the same type, monster, spell, or trap, to negate and if you do banish. Essentially, it has a Mechaba effect, but a million times better, because you banish from literally anywhere, hand, graveyard, or field. And unlike something like Invoked, unless you're banishing Alistair, you're not really going to get too much leverage off of your things being banished, because at least this deck can recycle them off of things like Cry or the floating effects of their big guys. Speaking of floating effects on the big guys, Ultimus says that if it's destroyed by an opponent's card, you can add up to 3 of your banished mutant cards, up to 1 each of monster, spell, and trap, to your hand. So because you're going to be using his negate a lot, preferably, you're almost guaranteed going to be adding 3 cards to your hand if he dies. So if they manage to kill this big boss monster, you're still going to gain advantage by adding a bunch of things back, and you can probably just make Ultimus again next turn. I think cards like Ultimus really signify this deck as a really good grind deck, because you're going to have a lot of resources in your graveyard or banish in order to both add back and banish as cost for things like Ultimus, the later on in the game that you get. For the rest of the extra deck, we do have the Phoenix Enforcer and the Verte, of course, to get out the Phoenix Enforcer. However, it can also send our 1 copy of Mutant Fusion, which I believe will not get the Carter Effect Clause. I don't think so, at least, because of the way the text is worded. But we also have Cross Sheep, IP, Phoenix, Unicorn, Appaloosa, Access Code, and a Dingirsu. We never really go into any of these, and this is actually a recent addition. I was playing Leviathan Dragon, or I'm sorry, not Leviathan Dragon, it was Leviathan the Sea Dragon, because you could summon 2 ST46s and go into it to summon back one of your other things, but to be fair, you're not really going to have 2 ST46s on field most of the time, and so it was just a bit redundant to play, and I always banished it off of Prosperity anyway, so I decided to play Dingirsu because, you know, might as well just have it to have it. Some other extra deck cards you can play, though, totally, are the Draglubion package with itself, Hope Harbinger, and the Numeron Dragon. Very, very good for ending games, as well as having something to sit on. The Hope Harbinger, though, is probably the thing that carries this package down, though, because you do already have Beast to negate spells, so there's really no point in going to Hope Harbinger unless you don't have the resources to banish for Beast cost. But the Numeron Dragon is probably very worth it, though, in case you feel like you aren't ending games quickly enough, because having a 9,000 plus attack Numeron Dragon is really, really good. And so overall, I would probably throw this engine in. I'm just kind of lazy. And then one final card that you could play in the deck is Ghost Ogre, because you are playing the 3 E-Telly, and so it would mesh really well with the rest of the deck. If you notice, we aren't playing any hand traps really, except for Dimension Shifter, because we're playing Dimension Shifter. And remember that you have to send your hand traps for cost for all of them except for like Imperm. And so Dimension Shifter kind of screws you over in that regard, but again, at the end of the day, it's still Dimension Shifter, and you're probably going to win games because of it. That's it for the general breakdown of the deck, though. I hope you all enjoyed that part, but now let's go ahead and get right into some replays so you can really see what this deck can do in action.
Like a Hellcat. Hellcat. like a Hellcat. Like a Hellcat. Coming like a hell. Like a Hellcat.
So there you have it. There are some mutant replays so you can see exactly what this deck can do. Admittedly, the replays are a bit old. I am reusing them from my last mutant video where I showed off replays, but I really just didn't feel like getting new replays, and they really just still hold up. As you could definitely see, the deck absolutely destroys graveyard focus decks. That poor BA player being forced to set all of his stuff because he couldn't do anything against a Dimension Shifter was just kind of sad. And then Eldritch players just really coped. They couldn't do anything. But with those out of the way, let's go ahead and look at some of the strengths of the deck. As you could see, especially with the Evolution Lab on board, it makes very, very large bodies that makes ending the game fairly easily, especially if you do play something like the Numeron Dragon. That makes it even easier. You can probably end the game on turn 2 if you really tried. Being able to summon your stuff directly from deck, especially such big boss monsters, is very powerful, even if you do have to utilize resources in order to do it. But things like Beast and Arsenal are very strong against a lot of different decks if you can afford to use the resources to use their effects. The fusions are actually really great and feel really rewarding to bring out compared to some of the other lower tier fusion decks, because they actually mesh really well with the actual playstyle of the deck, especially something like Ultimus, especially in the grind game, because you're going to have a lot of different things in order to negate. It's essentially just a better Mechaba. Of course, as you can see, every single big monster had a lot of floating and recursion, so your recovery in this deck is really good in case you get your board broken, as long as you're not getting your stuff banished or whatever. But then again, you do like banishing in the deck, so even that doesn't matter too much. Their levels allow for emergency teleport shenanigans all over the place for the low levels, as well as the higher levels giving you access to rank 8s, which is arguably probably the best Xyz pool outside of like rank 4. And then of course you can play a variety of powerful stun cards like D-Shifter, and there can be only one, which are just game enders for some decks. However, no deck on Sleeper Sunday is without its weaknesses, and so let's go over some of those for Mutant. It's still a very bricky deck, even with the 3 emergency teleport and the new support, due to the sheer amount of high level monsters you have to play. Of course, the 2 Beast, 2 Arsenal, and the Mist. That's 5 really big monsters that do absolutely nothing on their own, and even if you get to summon them from hand, well, congratulations, you just negged a card in your hand just to get your body out that could have been in deck. You also have Dimension Shifter and Dasher, which are big bodies that can't really do anything on their own, and Dimension Shifter can only work if you have no cards in your graveyard. Plus, things like Mutant Evolution Lab and Mutant Fusion don't do anything on their own either, and sometimes you might end up just setting a few trap cards and passing. The stuff that you banish for your cost doesn't float compared to something like Thunder Dragon, so you're actually kind of just negging in order to use any of your effects without another card to recur it just by using them. Absolutely nothing in this deck triggers when banished, and you have to rely on having cards that can utilize your banished cards, otherwise you're just losing resources outright. The recovery is also just a little bit too specific for my taste due to only working on destruction by an opponent's card, and so you can't really do anything crazy like Synthesis, Summon, Pop your own thing, and Float, and you can't do anything in case they're banished or, you know, if they're sent to the graveyard or anything like that. It doesn't perform crazy well under hand trap pressure either, unless you have something like Dimension Shifter to stop the hand traps, you know, except for Imperm again. Then you're going to be in a really bad situation without extension like the Mutant or the Teleport in hand if you get something like your MO5 or your ST46 hand trap. Finally, the little guys are absolutely dead on arrival if they don't have any resources to banish to summon the big guy, and certain big guys you really can't afford to bring out compared to others. Sometimes you really want to bring out an Arsenal or a Beast, but you're stuck bringing out a Mist against a deck that doesn't even play trap cards aside from Imperm, and so you're in a really bad spot in that case scenario, and that actually happens a lot more than you may think. But with that being said, how do we make Mutant better? Well, honestly, I think Mutant's already in a pretty decent spot despite the weaknesses that I said. But of course, I do think that there are some things that are needed to bump this out of Sleeper Sunday and into the tier lists. So I think having something that triggers on Banish would be really nice. I'm thinking of something like Cheng Ying, the Sword Soul level 10 synchro, because being able to have that effect in a deck like Mutant, especially with how much banishing they do natively, would be amazing. I would also just like some more banish recursion that's more common in the deck, aside from things like a Cry. Perhaps even something like Vortex Dragon, you know, shuffling back your banished stuff instead to trigger something. Maybe even a pop or something like the Cheng Ying Banish. But with those two combined, I'm thinking of another fusion so that you have something better to bring out than Synthesis depending on your resources, but you don't have to commit as much to bring it out as something like Ultimus. Because let's be real, Synthesis is pretty easy to bring out even though it is a bit specific, but sometimes you really can't do much with a Synthesis, and then Ultimus requiring 3 level 8s is just pain. Like sheer pain and suffering without Mutant Fusion banishing from deck and grave. So perhaps something that has a similar effect to the ones I just stated. Maybe, you know, something, if a card is banished, you know, you can quick effect banish a card in the field, something like that. But put it on a fusion that says, like, maybe 3 mutant monsters, period. You know, something without a strong negate like Ultimus, but something that's better than a single-use pop on Synthesis and then some protection. I would also like to see them get some more disruptive back row for the opponent's turn, rather than just stuff that kind of sits there. As you could tell, Clash and Blast really do nothing on their own, and then Expansion has its really good effect to summon, but it doesn't do anything to really stop the opponent, and then protection is honestly just not really even worth mentioning. So maybe if they got something like a counter trap, or maybe not a floodgate obviously, but maybe just some sort of disruption that really worked on the opponent's turn in the form of the back row, so that ST46 could search something that isn't Evo Lab or Cry. Finally, I would love to give them some sort of protection, maybe on like a piece of back row like I stated that also did something else, so that hand traps aren't really as big of an issue, because the deck negs so much to use their effects that a single hand trap could completely ruin your entire turn, because you just lose so many resources when you're trying to bring out a big guy. It's one of the major problems that Witchcrafter had that prevented it from seeing success, because, well, yeah, you can normal Shemitah effect tributing and sending a spell, but congratulations, you just got Ash Blossomed and you negged 2 cards for their 1. Especially because the cards don't float on banish like Thunder Dragon, you're really in a bad spot in case you see any sort of Ghost Girl. But with all of that out of the way, I think that's going to do it for my Sleeper Sunday analysis on mutants. Thank you all so much for watching if you did watch all the way through. I know people seem to really like mutants, evident by the, I think 54% pull on my voting poll that I made for my community tab. So with over half the votes going to the deck, it's kind of obvious that I'm making it and that people really seem to enjoy it. But speaking of the poll, by the way, a new system I'm going to be adding to Sleeper Sunday as a series is that at the end of every month, because I do make these at the beginning of each month, I'll be posting a poll on my community tab on YouTube for a few different deck options for what you could potentially see in Sleeper Sunday that everyone can vote on for the next episode, but it will only be up for the next 24 hours after it's posted, so be sure to pay attention to when it goes up if you really want a specific deck in. But once again, I do hope you all enjoyed, because that's going to have to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as I'll put this video and the channel into YouTube recommended, and if you really like this video and you want to see more content like it, like the rest of my Sleeper Sunday series, then perhaps consider subscribing, because it would mean the world. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.